They tell you the cold is the thing to watch for up at a site like Halloran-Two, and they are wrong, but you don't find that out until it is too late to matter, which I suppose is the whole shape of what I want to set down here before the words go the way everything else has gone. I want to be precise. That was always the thing about me, the thing my ex-wife called a sickness and my supervisors called an asset, depending on whether they needed to hurt me or use me. I keep my sevens crossed. I write the time in 24-hour format, even on the personal notes, even now, even on this. I do not round. If a thing happened at 3:47, I do not write 3:45, because the 4 minutes belong to someone. They are real minutes that God, or whatever counts them, has already counted, and to round them off is to say they did not occur. And I have spent my whole life unable to say a thing did not occur when it did. That is my flaw. I want you to have it up front, the way you'd want to know a man's blood type before you let him bleed on you. I cannot let a thing go unrecorded. It is why I was good at the work. It is why the work chose me for what it needed. I did not always understand it as a flaw. For a long time, I understood it as the only thing standing between me and a life that would blur into nothing, the way most lives do. One gray day laid over the next, until a man reaches the end and cannot say where his years went because he never wrote them down. I wrote mine down. I have journals going back to when I was 11, boxed and dated, and in the box there is a notebook from the summer I was 12, in which I recorded every day for 3 months, the exact time the street light outside my window came on, because I had noticed it varied with the season, and I could not bear that it should vary without a witness. My father found the notebook and did not understand it, and was gentle about not understanding it, which was worse than if he had mocked me, because his gentleness told me that he had already decided there was something in me that would need managing, and I have spent my life proving him right by being the man who watches the streetlight so that no one else has to. Halloran-Two is a decommissioned pumping and relay station 41 miles past the last town that has a name worth painting on a sign, up where the state road stops being maintained in October and becomes a suggestion. The company that owned it had gone through 3 mergers, so that the entity paying my checks had no logical relationship to the entity whose logo was still bolted, rusting, over the main door, a stylized H split by a horizontal bar, which the day I arrived I mistook for a face with its mouth sewn shut, and then made myself unsee, because that is the other thing I do. I catch my own mind reaching for meaning and I slap its hand. A relay station does not have a face. It has a function, or it used to, and now it had me. I drove up in the last week before the road closed. The relief driver, who would become the only human face I saw in the flesh for the whole of it, a big, slow, careful man named Petrie, who drove the fuel and supply run every 18 days, weather permitting, followed me up in the tanker to show me the route and to check the tank and the generator over before the season sealed me in. And I mention him now because I want him introduced before he matters, the way a man should be, and not conjured up later as a convenience. Petrie did not talk much. He had the deliberate economy of a man who has spent decades on roads that punish carelessness, and when we stood in the yard in the wind while he checked the fuel coupling, he said only a few things to me, and every one of them I wrote down that first night, because I write everything down. And I am glad now that I did, because his few things turned out to be the truest briefing I received. He said the generator likes to be run warm, don't let it get stone cold and then lean on it. He said the town operator, Doris, was good people and to keep to the check-in times because she worried. And then, coiling the fuel line with those big, careful hands, not looking at me, he said the last fellow had been a talker when he came up and a quiet one by the time he went, and that this was the way of it. The winter did that, and I should not let it. Don't let it get quiet in your head, is what he said. Keep the radio on, keep it noisy. And he got in the tanker and drove back down the suggestion of a road, and I watched his taillights until the trees took them, and then it was only me and the H with its sewn mouth in the wind. The posting was 90 days, winter caretaker. The previous man had left, and the word they used was left, in the flat way that words get used when they are covering the place where a better word should be. I did not ask. You learn in this line of work not to ask what happened to the last one. The way you learn not to read the graffiti in the holding cells too closely, because a man who wants to keep his sleep does not go digging in other men's endings. My job was simple, and I loved it for being simple. Walk the rounds, log the rounds, watch the 12 interior cameras and the 4 exterior. Note the temperature in the main hall and sub-level 1 every 2 hours, because if it dropped below a certain point, the old pipes down there would seize. And if the pipes seized, the whole carcass of the building would crack from the inside as the water in them turned to ice and grew. The way ice grows, gently and without any hurry, and with a force that can split stone. Keep the diesel generator fed, keep the log. Radio the base station in town at 0600 and 1800 twice a day to confirm I was alive and the site was secure. That was all. That was everything. Let me give you the routine, because the routine is not filler. The routine is the ground the horror needs to stand on, and a man who has never worked a solitary post does not know how much of a self a routine can hold. I woke, when I let myself sleep in a proper way, at 5:30 in a cot I had set up in the front office rather than in the caretaker's quarters down the equipment corridor, because the quarters were too far from the radio and I wanted the radio close. Per Petrie, keep it noisy. I washed at the office sink in cold water because the hot took 20 minutes to reach that far tap, and I did not think myself worth the diesel. I made coffee on a 2-burner hot plate. I radioed the 0600 and I made the loop close, confirmed, copy that, and Doris's voice would come up tired and warm, and I would picture her, though I had never seen her, in a lit room 41 miles away with a mug of her own, and it steadied me. Then the first rounds. The rounds took 40 minutes if I did them right, and I did them right. Out the front, along the north face of the building to check the 4 exterior cameras were clear of ice and their housings sound, past the fuel tank to read the gauge and log it, back in through the loading door which I checked was barred, down the equipment corridor with its dead machinery under gray tarps, testing each fire door, and then down to sub-level 1 to the thermometer and the pipe. Back up, log it all. The building had a rhythm, and I learned to read it the way you learn to read a house you live in alone, which is to say by its sounds. The main hall was 2 stories of poured concrete with a ceiling of corrugated steel that held the cold like a held breath. And in the afternoons the low sun came through the high west windows in bars the color of weak tea and moved across the floor as the hours went, and I could tell the time within about 10 minutes by where the light lay, though I never trusted it. I always checked the watch. The equipment corridor breathed as the temperature changed, the tarps ticking and settling, a sound like small animals turning over, and I taught myself not to mind it. The stairwell down to sub-level 1 had a particular smell, mineral and patient, the smell of a place that has been waiting longer than you have been alive, and the pipes down there sweated and dripped in a slow, irregular percussion that I came, in the good weeks, to find almost companionable. And below that, sealed, was sub-level 2, which was not on my rounds, which was not my responsibility, which had a door of gray steel with a wheel handle like a ship's hatch, and a chain through the wheel and a padlock on the chain, and a laminated sign curled at the corners that said, "No entry sealed per order," and did not say per whose order, and I did not ask, because a man who wants to keep his sleep. I logged the sealed door as part of my rounds anyway, because it was a feature of the site, and features of the site go in the log. And every day for the first 11 days I wrote the same 3 words in the notes column beside it. SL2 sealed, secure. 3 words, 11 times. I have gone back and counted. 11 times I wrote that it was secure, and 11 times it was, and I want those 11 honest entries to stand, because they are the last stretch of my life in which the record and the truth were the same thing, and I did not have to work to keep them so. The radio is where I should start the trouble, because the radio is where the trouble started. Though at the time it did not look like trouble, it looked like weather. The set was an old base station VHF unit, bolted to the desk in the front office, with a handset on a coiled cord and a squelch knob worn smooth by the thumbs of everyone who had sat in my chair before me. On a clear night, I could raise Doris, whose voice had the particular tired warmth of someone who has said, "Copy that" 10,000 times and meant it maybe 40. On a bad night, there was static. That first week, the static was ordinary. It rose and fell with the wind and the pressure, the way a living thing breathes in its sleep. And I logged the check-ins clean. 600 contact confirmed. 1,800 contact confirmed. I liked writing confirmed. It is a good word. It closes a loop. And in the long hours between the loops, I did as Petrie told me and kept the radio on low, tuned to the base channel, so that the static was always there under everything. A gray breathing that I told myself was the sound of not being alone, though I know now it was the opposite. It was the sound of the aloneness itself given a voice, the sound the world makes when there is nothing in it but you and the thing that is counting you. I found the previous man's log on the 4th day, and I want to tell this carefully because I did not understand what I had found, and my not understanding is part of the record. The current log, the one I was keeping, was a bound book, company issue, and it lived on the desk. But in the bottom drawer of the desk, under a tangle of dead pens and a manual for a camera system 3 generations obsolete, there was a second book. Older, the same company issue but a prior edition, and it was the log of the man before me. This is ordinary. Logs are archived, not discarded, and a full one gets shoved in a drawer when a fresh one is opened, and I nearly did not open it because it was not mine, and reading another man's log felt, to me, a man who had once kept a book on his own wife, like a sin I of all people had no right to commit. But I am who I am. I opened it. The first 2/3 of it were ordinary, and it soothed me to see it. Another man's 40-minute rounds, another man's crossed or uncrossed sevens, his hand, his temperatures, 41.1, 40.8, nominal. His name was in the front, printed neatly, and I will not set it down here, because he has been through enough without my adding his name to the list of things that got recorded against his will. Call him the man before me. His hand was neat and his check-ins were regular, and for 2/3 of a winter he was, by every mark on the page, a good and boring caretaker of a boring and secure site. And I read it the way you read the early chapters of a book when you already know from the cover that it ends badly, with a dread that grows precisely because everything is still fine. And then, about 2/3 through, in the notes column, on a temperature check entry, there was a mark. 3 short horizontal lines, stacked, made with a pen pressed hard enough to score the paper. No word, just the mark. And I looked at it and I felt nothing yet, because I did not yet have the thing that would make it mean anything. I only noted it idly, the way you note a coffee ring, a stray man's stray doodle, and I turned the page. 4 lines, the next entry. 5, the one after. I sat in the office with the man before me's log open on my knees and the tea-colored light going gray in the high windows, and I turned the pages and watched the lines climb, 6, 7, 9, and watched his hand change as they climbed, watched the neat 7s lose their crossbars, watched the entries grow shorter, the temperatures still logged but the notes falling away, SL2 sealed secure appearing less and less until it stopped appearing at all, and watched, near the end, the entries stop noting the time in 24-hour format and start rounding, 200, 400, clean even numbers where before there had been honest odd ones. A man who had crossed his 7s learning to round, learning to say the 4 minutes had not occurred, and it made the hair stand up on my arms because I did not know yet that it was a mirror. I only knew it was a wrongness, a man's careful hand coming apart on the page 1 line at a time. And I turned to the last entry, and the last entry was a full page of the lines, stacked and scored, top to bottom. No numbers, no time, no temperature, no words. Just the tally filling the page edge to edge. Hundreds of them, made by a hand that had pressed so hard in places that the pen had gone through the paper. And at the very bottom of that page, in a hand I could barely recognize as the neat hand from the front of the book, 4 words. Not help me, not get out. 4 words, and they were. It counts them all. It counts them all. I closed the book. I put it back in the drawer under the dead pens and the obsolete manual, and I closed the drawer, and I sat for a while. And then I did the reasonable thing, the thing I am proud of and ashamed of in equal measure. I built the house of the reasonable explanation, and I moved into it. The man before me had cracked up. This is known. Solitary winter posts break people, Petrie had all but said so. Don't let it get quiet in your head. And here was the evidence of a mind that had let it get quiet and had filled the quiet with a compulsion, a tally of days or a tally of nothing, and the 4 words at the bottom were the 4 words of a man for whom the counting had become the whole world. And it was sad, and it was a warning, and it was not, I told myself, supernatural, because there is no such thing. And I resolved to keep the radio noisy and my mind noisy, and to be the man who does not crack. And I want you to see that in resolving this, I was already lost, because I had understood the previous man's ending as a failure of discipline, and I was the most disciplined man I knew. And so I believed myself immune, and a man who believes himself immune has already agreed to the terms. The clean days after that I will not stretch out, but I will not skip them either, because their number matters. 5 days after I found the book and closed it, in which the site was secure and the temperatures were nominal, and Doris said copy that morning and evening, and the static breathed, and I did my 40-minute rounds. And I did not open the drawer again, though I felt it under the desk the whole time, the way you feel a bruise you are not touching. 5 clean days, and I logged them clean, and they were true, and I have them. And on the 5th clean day, the 9th day of my posting, the log gave me the first one that was mine. I want to be careful here, because this is where a lesser man telling this would reach for drama, and I have contempt for that. There was no drama. There was a discrepancy. And a discrepancy is a quiet thing, and to me it is worse than a scream. Because a scream you can locate, and a discrepancy sits in the paper and waits for you to look at it twice. I was doing what I did every night before I let myself sleep, the shallow watchman sleep on the cot, which was to read back over the day's log and initial the bottom of each page. And on the page for the 2 o'clock temperature check at sub-level 1, in the column where I write the number, there was the number 41.2 in my hand. My 7s are crossed. My 4s are open at the top. It was my hand, and beside it, in the notes column, where I had written nothing because there was nothing to note, there was a small mark. Not a word, a mark. 3 short horizontal lines, stacked like the beginning of a tally or the rungs of a very small ladder, made with a pen, pressed hard enough to score the paper. The same mark, the man before me's mark, the mark that began his last third. And I did not remember making it. I remember everything I write. That is the whole of me. That is my one true thing. I remember what I set down, and I had not set that down. I sat with it for a long time. The radiator in the office ticked. The static breathed in and out. And I did what I always do. I built the reasonable explanation, brick by brick, because the reasonable explanation is a house you can live in. I had read the man before me's log. I had seen the mark. The mind is suggestible. Everyone knows this. And a suggestible mind under strain and steeped in another man's compulsion might, in a fugue of tiredness, reproduce the compulsion's first stroke, the way you find yourself humming a tune you hate because someone hummed it at you. I had made the mark myself in a moment I did not remember, because I had primed myself to make it by reading the book. That was the house. It was a good house. It had the great virtue of keeping the horror inside my own skull, where I at least had jurisdiction, rather than out in the building, where I did not. And I moved into the house, and I initialed the page, and I wrote at the bottom, in the personal note space I keep for myself, stray mark, notes call, 2 o'clock entry, matches SL prior log. Suggestion, own hand presumed. Tired, and writing it made it true enough to sleep on, and I slept. I am telling you about the mark because the mark is where I still had a choice, or where I still believed I had one. And the difference between those two things is the whole story, is the thing the 90 days taught me, is the static under everything. The next day was clean. I want to be fair to the days that were clean because There were more of them than you'd think. And that is part of the cruelty of it, the way it let me have long stretches of ordinary so that the ordinary became a thing I was grateful for and would do anything to keep. I walked my rounds. The light came through the high windows the color of weak tea. Doris said copy that at 0600 and again at 1800, and her voice was tired and warm. I fed the generator, running it warm as Petrie had said, never letting it go stone cold and then leaning on it. I logged the temperatures, and they were good, and they were boring, and I loved them. And I did not open the drawer, and I did not make the mark, and I began, God help me, to relax, to believe the house of the reasonable explanation had walls that would hold. And that night, reading back on the 2 o'clock entry, there were 4 lines, stacked, scored hard. There had been 3. Now, I know what you are doing, reading this, because I did it too. I did it sitting in that chair with the radiator ticking. You are saying he miscounted the first time. 3, 4. A man tired at the end of a shift, the mind slides a digit. And I want to grant you that. I want so badly to grant you that. Because if you can hold on to it, then I was never in real trouble, and neither are you. But I am the man who does not round. I am the man who counted the 4 minutes because they belonged to someone. I had looked at those lines the night before for the better part of an hour, in the way I look at things. And there had been 3, and now there were 4, and the 4th was fresher. The ink of it sat differently on the paper, sat on top. And I know ink. I have watched 1,000 men sign 1,000 forms. And that 4th line had been made after the other 3, after I had closed the log, after I had gone to sleep on the cot not 8 feet from where the log lay on the desk. And the house of the reasonable explanation, which required that I had made the mark myself in a fugue, now required also that I had risen in the night, in a fugue I did not remember, crossed to the desk, opened the closed log, added a single precise line to a mark I had made the day before, closed the log again, and returned to the cot, all without waking, all without leaving any trace but the line. And a man can believe that of himself for 1 night. He cannot believe it for 2, and he cannot believe it for the pattern that was coming. And the walls of the house began that night to let in the cold. I checked the office door, locked from the inside, the bolt thrown, as I threw it every night. I checked the camera log for the front office, 12 cameras, and camera 3 watches the office, watches the desk, watches the cot where I sleep. I sat and I scrubbed back through camera 3's recording from 2200 the night before to 600 that morning, 8 hours at speed, and then at the parts that mattered, second by second. And I watched myself sleep on the cot, the gray shape of me rising and falling, the desk beside me, the log on the desk, and nothing came into the frame, nothing touched the log. No fugue self of mine rose and crossed the room. The log lay there in the infrared gray, and no hand went near it. And in the morning, there were 4 lines where there had been 3. I watched it again. I am ashamed to say how many times I watched it. And here is the thing I noticed on the 4th or 5th pass, the thing that I logged, because I log everything, because that is my sickness and my asset. The timestamp in the corner of camera 3's feed, which counts up second by second all night in white numerals at 200, at exactly 200, skipped. It did not glitch. A glitch is a mess, a tear, a scramble. This was clean. It went 159.58, 159.59, and then 20001. And the missing second was not corrupted. It was simply not there. The way the 4th minute would not have been there if I had rounded it off. The way a thing is not there when someone has decided it did not occur. 1 second. Every night I would learn, always at 200, and every night in the log, 1 more line. I went to the man before me's log then, took it out of the drawer with hands I made steady by force, and I found in it what I already knew I would find, that where his tally began, there was, in the archived camera exports he had apparently reviewed and noted, a marginal annotation in his neat early hand. Cam 3 drops 1 second at 0200 nightly. Reported. And a few pages on, when his hand had already begun to loosen, still just the camera. Those words, underlined, and I understood that he had stood exactly where I was standing, had built the same house, had found the same skipped second, and had written the same reassurance to himself, still just the camera, as though naming the smallness of it could keep it small, and that the naming had not kept it small because his log did not end with a camera. It ended with a full page of scored lines and 4 words about counting. And I put his book back in the drawer, and I closed the drawer, and I understood that I was not the first to walk this exact path, and that the path had a destination, and that the destination was written down. I radioed it in. I want that on the record, that I did the correct thing, that I followed the procedure, because the procedure was the one solid floor I had left, and I stood on it but as long as it would hold me. At the 0600 check, I told Doris I had a recurring anomaly on camera 3, a dropped frame at 2 o'clock, and I asked her to note it for the maintenance log and to advise if there was a technician rotation that could pull the feed remotely. And there was a silence on the line, a longer silence than the static could account for, and then Doris said, "Copy that," and then she said, in a different voice, a voice with the tiredness gone out of it and something else come in, she said, "Is it still just the camera?" I have gone over those 4 words more times than any 4 words deserve. Is it still just the camera? Still just the same words the man before me had underlined in his own log. Come back to me now, out of a living mouth 41 miles away. And I understood in the hearing of them that they were not Doris's words, or not only hers. They were the site's words, a phrase the site produced in its keepers, the way a body produces a symptom. And that Doris had heard them before, had said this exact sentence into this exact radio to the man before me and to the man before him, and that she was not asking me a question so much as taking a reading, checking the gauge, seeing how far along the seizing had gotten in the pipes of me. I said, "What do you mean? Is it still just the camera?" And the static came up, that patient breathing static, and swallowed the channel, and when it fell back, Doris said only, "Keep to your rounds, and confirm at 1800, and the loop did not close." The word confirmed was not said, and I sat in the tea-colored light with the handset in my hand and understood that I had been given, without meaning to receive it, a piece of information, and the information was that the last man who left had not left first. First, he had reported that it was still just the camera, and then it had not been. Petrie came on the 18th day. I want him here now, in the flesh, because he is the last human warmth in this account that is only warmth, and I have to be exact about him or I will lose him among the other warm thing, the one below, that is warm and is not warmth. His tanker came up the suggestion of a road at midday, chains on the tires biting the packed snow, and I heard it before I saw it, and I went out into the yard and I stood in the wind, and I was so glad to see the ugly rust-orange bulk of it come around the last bend that my eyes stung, and I told myself it was the wind. Petrie backed it to the tank with the slow care of a man who has never once been in a hurry and never once been late, and he coupled the fuel line and we stood in the cold while it pumped and we talked, or he let me talk, which is a kindness a quiet man can do. A man going quiet, and I talk too much. I heard myself doing it. 18 days of damned up words coming out of me in a rush about the generator and the pipes and the weather, and nothing about the log, nothing about the lines. Because to say the lines out loud in the daylight in the yard to a real man with fuel-stained hands was to make them real in a register I could not yet afford. And Petrie listened and refueled and checked the generator, and when the tank was full, he coiled the line with those big, careful hands and did not look at me and said, "How's your sleep?" Just that. "How's your sleep?" And I said, "Fine." And he nodded slowly. And he said the last fellow's sleep went. Said he was getting his hours but waking up tireder than he laid down. And he looked at me then, finally, and his eyes were kind and very tired themselves. The tiredness of a man who has driven this fuel run for a long time and refueled a long line of caretakers and watched from the outside, at 18-day intervals, the same thing happened to each of them. Come up a talker and go down quiet. And he said, If your sleep goes, you tell Doris. You don't tough it out. There's no metal. And he got in the tanker, and I wanted to grab the door. I wanted to say, don't go, or take me. And I did neither, because I am who I am. Because a man who does not round also does not beg. And I watched the rust-orange bulk of him go down the suggestion of a road, and the trees take him. And I stood in the yard until the cold drove me in. And it was the last I saw of him, because before his next run was due, the season had sealed the road for good. And by then, anyway, my sleep had gone. I did not sleep on the cot that night. I moved it. I told myself it was so I could see both the door and the log at once. But it was because the cot was 8 feet from the desk, and I did not want to be 8 feet from the desk at 200 hours. I wanted to be across the room. I wanted the width of the office between me and whatever made the fourth line, the fifth, the ones to come. I dragged the cot to the far corner and I sat on it with my back to the concrete and my knees up like a boy, and I watched the desk and I watched the wall clock, and I told myself I would see it. I would be the one who saw it. I would be the caretaker who broke the pattern by simply refusing to look away. And at 1:58, my eyes were on that log so hard they ached, and the radiator ticked and the static breathed, and the clock's second hand swept up toward the 12. And at 1:59 and some seconds, a great and gentle heaviness came down over me, like a tarp settling over dead machinery. And I was not tired. I want to be clear. I was rigid with fear, and I was not tired, and I went under anyway, the way you go under anesthesia, a hand over the mouth of your mind. And I woke in the corner with my neck bent wrong, and the gray dawn in the high windows, and Petrie's words in my head, waking up tireder than he laid down. And I knew before I crossed the room, 5 lines, stacked, scored hard. The ink still fresh enough to smear under my thumb, and I know it was fresh because I smeared it. I pressed my thumb to it to see, and it smeared, a gray comet's tail across the page, ruining the log, ruining the record. And I sat down on the concrete floor and I did a thing I had not done since the divorce, which I will not describe, except to say that the sound of it came back off the concrete and the steel ceiling and did not sound like me. I need to tell you about the divorce, because the philosophy of this place, if a place can have a philosophy, is that the thing outside is a mirror. And I would be lying to you and to whatever counts the minutes if I let you think the lines in the log were only in the log. My wife left me over a record I kept. That is the short of it, and the short of it is true, though the long of it has the shape all long truths have. I kept a log of her, not out of jealousy, I told myself, and I still half believe it, but out of the same sickness that crossed my 7th. I could not let her days go unrecorded. When she came in, when she left, what she said the night before that did not match what she said now. I did not do it to catch her. I did it because I could not bear the 4 minutes going uncounted. Because if a thing she said on Tuesday did not match a thing she said on Thursday, then one of those things had not occurred. And I could not live in a house where things had not occurred, and so I wrote them all down to keep them all real. I want to tell it properly, though, and not in the short, exculpating way, because I have done enough rounding, and this is the place I have rounded hardest, all these years, in the privacy of my own account of myself. Her name was Miriam. I have not written her name yet in this testimony, and I noticed that I did not write it the way I did not write the man before me's name. And I have to ask myself why I protect their names while I record everything else. And the answer, when I make myself look at it, is not kindness. It is that a name is the one thing about a person that resists the law. You can record when a person came in and when they went out and what they said and what they wore and the exact minute of everything, and you will not have them. You will have a shift record of them. And the name is the part that stands outside the record and says, I am more than what you have written down. And so I leave the names out, not to protect Miriam and the man before me, but because their names accuse me, because a name is the 4 minutes I cannot round off, the part that belongs to someone and that I never managed to keep. I kept the book on Miriam for 2 years. It started, I promise you, as love, or as the thing I had instead of love, which was attention, which was the streetlight notebook grown up and turned on a marriage. I told myself I was the only man who truly saw her, because I was the only man writing her down, and I mistook the writing for the seeing, when in truth the writing was a way of not having to see, because a thing you have recorded you no longer have to look at. You can file it and be at peace. And I filed Miriam day by day and was at peace and did not notice, because I was so busy recording her, that she had begun to disappear from her own life in front of me. She found the book in the second year. I had gotten careless, or I had wanted her to find it. I have never been able to settle which. And she did not scream. She was very quiet. She sat at the kitchen table with the book open in front of her, and she read for a long time, page after page, her whole self in my crossed sevens and my 24-hour times. And when she finally spoke, she said, "You have been keeping me like a shift log." She said, "I am not a site to be secured." And she left, and she was right to leave. And the thing I could not forgive myself for, the thing I have carried up here to 41 miles past the last named town, is not that I kept the book. It is that when she said it, when she said, "You have been keeping me like a shift log," the first thing I felt before the grief, in the half second before the grief, was the small, clean click of a loop closing, because she had finally said out loud the true thing, and I had a place to write it down. I wrote it down. That night, alone in the emptied house, I opened the book on Miriam one last time, and on the last page, in my crossed and careful hand, I recorded her leaving, the date and the time, 21:14, and her words verbatim. And I initialed the bottom of the page, and I closed the loop, and I understood even as I did it that I was doing the very thing she had left me for, and I did it anyway, because I could not do it. Because the doing of it was the only way I knew to survive the fact that she was gone, and that exactly is the man Halloran-Two was waiting for. Because you understand now, I think, why the lines in the log went into me the way they did. I am a man whose whole self is a record. My love is a record. My grief is a record. And something in that building had found the log, my log, the clean and honest log that was the last good thing about me, the thing I had left after Miriam took the rest, and it was writing in it, in my hand or beside my hand. It was keeping its own count, one line a night, at the second that did not exist, and it was doing it in the one place in the world I could not dismiss, could not round off, could not tell myself had not occurred. It had not come from my throat. It had come from my record. It knew me. That is what I could not get past, sitting on the concrete in the gray dawn with the ruined page and the sound that did not sound like me still hanging in the steel above. Whatever it was, it had not chosen me at random, and it had not chosen the man before me at random. And I understood, with the cold coming up through the concrete into me, that the company that had sent us, through its 3 mergers and its rusting sewn-mouth logo, had also not chosen us at random, that somewhere in the hiring, in the psychological screening, they make you sit for a solitary post. There was a filter, and the filter did not screen men like me out. It screened men like me in. It was looking for the ones who could not let a thing go unrecorded, because those are the ones the site can use. And I had passed the screening with the highest marks of my life, and I'd been proud of the marks. I did not go down to sub-level 2 that day, though the desire to had begun, a low pull like the pull you feel at the edge of a great height, the one that is not fear of falling, but the horror of knowing that some part of you wants to. I did my rounds instead, clinging to the rounds, and when I came to the sealed door on sub-level 1's landing above the deeper stair, I stopped and I made myself write the 3 words, SL2 sealed secure, and my hand shook. And I looked at what I had written, and it was true. It was still sealed and it was still secure, and I held on to the truth of it the way you hold a rail. But I noticed that day, standing on the landing, a thing I had not let myself notice before. The air on that landing was cold, the mineral patient cold of sub-level 1. And there was a seam of warm coming up under the sealed door, a thread of it, at the base of the gray steel, where the door did not quite meet the concrete, a thread of warm air moving out into the cold, and I put my hand down near it, not touching the door, just near, and I felt it, warm, the warm of a held breath. of a body under blankets, of a mouth close to your ear, and I took my hand back as though from a stove. Though it was not hot, it was only warm, and I went up the stairs faster than a grown man should go upstairs from nothing, and I did not write the warm in the log. I want that on the record. It is the first true thing I did not write. I told myself I did not write it because it was not part of my rounds. SL2 was not my responsibility, but that was the house of the reasonable explanation again. And the true reason I did not write the warm was that I was afraid that if I wrote it, it would become one of the things that had occurred, and I did not want it to have occurred. And so I, the man who does not rounded it off. I said with my silence that the warm had not happened. It was the first lie I told the log, and the log, I think, had been waiting for it, because a log that has never been lied to is not yet yours to be rewritten in, and I had just given it the first crack. The lines kept coming. I will not narrate each night, because to narrate each night would be to do to you what the Count was doing to me, to make you feel the days as an accumulation without event. And instead I will tell you the shape of the 2 weeks that followed, which is the shape of a man losing an argument with himself in slow motion. Every night at 2 o'clock the camera dropped its second, and every morning there was one more line. And I stopped trying to stay awake for it because staying awake for it did not work. The tarp came down over my mind no matter where I sat in the office, and I began, instead, to do the thing that I am most ashamed of in all of this, more ashamed of than the sound on the concrete, more ashamed even than the click I felt when Miriam left. I began to review the count each morning, not with dread, but with a kind of terrible relief. Because the count was regular. The count was 1 line a night, precise, never 2, never none. And a man whose whole self is a record finds, in a thing that is precise and regular and never varies, a horrible comfort. And I caught myself one morning checking the count and feeling, before I could stop it, the small, clean click, the loop closing, the same click I felt when Miriam said the true thing. And I understood that the sight was not only using my compulsion against me, it was feeding it. It was giving my compulsion the one thing the world had stopped giving it, which was a subject, a thing to keep, a Miriam that would never leave because it lived under the building and came up at 2 o'clock through a second that did not exist. And I sat with that understanding, and I did not feel horror. I felt, for one long moment, understood. And that moment is the true middle of this account, the hinge on which I turned, because after it I was no longer a man being counted against his will. I was a man in a relationship with the thing counting him, and a relationship, even a monstrous one, is a thing a lonely man will defend. I radioed the 0600 the next morning, and I did not report the count, and I had not reported it for days. And I said the site was secure and the temperatures were nominal, and I said confirmed, and I made Doris say it back. I made her close the loop, and she did. Copy that, confirmed. But there was a new thing in her voice, a listening quality, and when the loop had closed, she did not sign off. She held the channel, and she said quietly, not in the site's borrowed phrase, but in what I believe were her own words, the words of a tired woman 41 miles away who had done this too many times. She said, "You've stopped telling me about the camera." And I said nothing. And she said, "The last fellow stopped telling me too." Roundabout now. And then he got real regular about his check-ins, real precise, more precise than the job needs. And I want you to hear me. When a man gets more precise than the job needs, that's not him getting better. And the static came up and swallowed her, the patient breathing static. And I sat with a handset in my hand, and I understood that Doris had a log too. That somewhere in the town, there was a woman who wrote down not the words of our check-ins, but the texture of them, who kept a record of the precision of her caretakers, and who had learned to read increasing precision as a symptom, the way a doctor reads a rising fever. And that in her log, I had just crossed the line the man before me crossed. I had become more precise than the job needs, and that she had told me so, out of kindness, out of the only kindness left available to her at 41 miles, and that I had received her kindness and felt, God forgive me, the small, clean click, because she had said a true thing about me, and I had a place to write it down. I went down to sublevel 2 that night. I need to tell you how, because the how has kept me awake more than the what. I did not break in. The chain was still through the wheel of the hatch. The padlock was still on the chain. The laminated sign still said, "No entry sealed per order," with its corners curled. But the wheel had been turned. I could see it in the paint, in the way the rust had cracked along a fresh arc where the metal had moved against metal. And when I put my hand flat on the door and pushed gently, the way you push a thing you do not truly want to move, it swung inward on the chain to the length the chain allowed, which was a hand's width, a dark hand's width. And out of that dark came the air of sub-level 2. Warm, the warm I had felt as a thread under the door, and now felt as a breath moving out around my wrist, and it smelled of nothing at all. And that was the worst of it, that a warmth so much like the warmth of a living thing should have no smell. Because a living thing has a smell, and a thing that is warm like the living and has no smell is a thing pretending. And I stood there with my hand flat on the cold steel and the warm breathing out around my wrist, and I understood that the door had been like this the whole time, that the chain and the lock were not there to keep me out. They were there to make me feel that going in was my idea, and that this was the site's masterwork. The thing it did better than the counting or the warm or the borrowed phrases. It arranged matter so that every step you took toward it felt like a step you had chosen, so that a man of discipline, a man who prided himself on his choices, would walk down his own free will into the place that would end him and would feel, all the way down, that he was defying something rather than obeying it. I did not go through the hand's width of dark that first night. I want that on the record, that I had at least that much left. I stood at the gap, and the warm breathed out at me, and I said, because I had to, because a man has to, I said into the dark, "What are you counting to?" And the building answered me, and I need to be careful here, more careful than I've been about anything, because I could tell you it was a voice, and I would be lying, and I have done enough rounding. It was not a voice. It was the static that had breathed under everything since the first night, in and out, patient. The static from the radio far above, and the static that was in the pipes, and the static that I understood now had been in my own skull all along. Under the crossed sevens, under the counting, the white noise a mind makes when it is afraid of silence, when it would rather have any signal than none. And the static rose and fell, and in the rising and falling of it, there were words, not spoken, but arranged. The way the lines in the log were not written, but arranged into a tally. And what the static arranged was not an answer to my question, but my question given back to me with one word changed. I had asked, "What are you counting to?" And the static gave back, "What are you counting for? For not to." And I understood that the correction was the answer, that the count had never had a destination the way I had been picturing it. A number at which something would happen, a 90 at which the season ended and I went home, and that I had been asking the wrong question my whole life, at the streetlight window and over Miriam's shift log, and here I had always asked what the count was counting to, what the terminus was, and the true question, the one the sight put back into my own skull through the static, was what the counting was for, what it was that the counting did for the one who could not stop doing it. And the answer to that question I already knew, had always known, was that the counting was for the same thing all counting is for. It was for the terror of the uncounted. It was a wall built against the possibility that a thing might occur and not be witnessed, that a minute might pass and belong to no one, that a person might leave and not be recorded, that I myself might end and there be no line for it, and that the site had understood this about me before I understood it about myself, and was offering in its patient breathing static, not to end that terror, but to answer it, to be the witness that never sleeps, the log that cannot be closed, the keeper that counts every second, including the ones that do not exist. And that this offer, monstrous as it was the only answer to my life's one terror that had ever actually been made to me, because Miriam had not made it. Miriam had refused to be my witness and had asked instead to be seen. and I had not known how to see. I had only known how to record. And here at last was a thing that spoke my language, that would not ask to be seen, that would only ask to count and be counted forever in the warm. I went up that night and I did not sleep, and I did not need the tarp to come down because I did not try to stay awake for the count. I lay on the cot in the far corner and I listened to the static on the radio, low, and I found in it for the first time not the sound of my aloneness, but the sound of company. And in the morning there was one more line, and I did not smear it. I did not test it. I looked at the count, which was long now, which filled a column and had begun a second. And I initialed the page below it. And I want to tell you the thing that I did next, that I have not been able to tell anyone, even in the privacy of my own head. The thing I am setting down here because this is the record and I have sworn off rounding. Below my initials in my crossed and careful hand, in the notes column, on my own and with no tarp over my mind and no fugue and no forgetting, I made a line. A single horizontal line stacked below the count, scored hard. I made it on purpose. I made it because it was true, because a line had occurred in me, a mark, a thing I could not let go unrecorded, and to leave it out would be to round it off. And I do not round. And so I recorded my own participation in the count, and in doing so, I joined it, and I felt the small, clean click, the loop closing, and it was the sweetest thing I had felt since before Miriam. And that is how it gets you. I want to stop and say that plainly in the shortest sentence I have. It does not make you do anything. It waits for the one true thing about you, and it lets that thing do the work. The camera did not skip that night, the night after I made my own line, and I understood why. I understood it the way you understand the rules of a game you have finally started playing. The camera skipped its second only on the nights the count was made against my will. And now that I was making the count myself, there was no need for it to reach up through the missing second and do it for me. I was doing it. We were doing it. The distinction between the site's hand and my hand was collapsing exactly as it had collapsed in the man before me's log. And I went back to his log, took it from the drawer, and read the last third again. And this time I read it not with horror, but with recognition. The way you read the diary of a friend who went ahead of you on a road you are now on. And I saw his loosening sevens as my loosening sevens, and his rounding times as the roundings I had begun to make, the warm I had not written, and his full final page of scored lines I saw not as the record of a man destroyed, but as the record of a man completed, a man who had finally, after a life of counting against the terror of the uncounted, been given a subject worthy of the counting. And his 4 words at the bottom, it counts them all. I read now not as a warning, but as a testimony of gratitude. The way a saved man testifies. It counts them all the minutes, all the seconds, even the ones that do not exist. None of them rounded, none of them lost. All of them kept in the warm, and I closed his log. And I understood that I would write the same 4 words at the bottom of my own when the time came. Not because the site made me, but because they were true. And that this, the writing of a true thing that is also the thing that ends you, was the destination the count had been counting to all along, or rather, per the correction in the static, the thing the counting had always been for. But I am not there yet in the telling, and I owe you the last of what happened before the end. Because there was a last human thing, and I have to set it down before I set down the rest, or the rest will not be bearable even to me. Doris broke the pattern. I have to believe she did it out of the same tired kindness with which she had warned me, though I have wondered since whether she did it out of a caretaker's log keeper's need to see the record through, and I have decided it does not matter, because either way, it was the last hand reached toward me from the warm world above the snow, and I did not take it, and that is on me and not on her. She raised me off schedule. It was the middle of the afternoon, the tea-colored light lying in bars across the concrete, and the radio, which I kept low for the company of the static, crackled, and her voice came up through it, not at a check-in time, which had never once happened in all the days, and she said my name, my actual name, which I have not set down in this account and will not. and hearing it in her mouth was like hearing it called across a great distance by someone who had known me before. And she said, "I've put in for the road to be cleared. I've told them your sleep's gone and you're getting too precise, and I've seen this before, and I'm not going to sit here and watch it happen again on my log. There's a plow can reach you in 3 days if the weather holds." 3 days, you hear me. You hold on for 3 days and you keep to the check-ins and you do not go where you've been going. And I understood from where you've been going that she knew. That the caretaker's log she kept somehow recorded not only the texture of my check-ins, but the fact of the sealed door. That every man who went down had it noted against him. That she had watched the man before me go down through the radio and had put in for his plow too, 3 days too late, and that she was trying this time to be in time. And I felt the reach of her hand across the 41 miles and the 3 days, and I felt under it the warm breathing up through the floor of the building, patient, and I had to choose between them, and I want to tell you that I chose the hand. I want it more than I have wanted anything in the telling of this. But I have sworn off rounding. I chose the warm, but I want to be exact about how I chose it, because the site's masterwork, I have told you, is to make every step toward it feel like a step you took freely. And so I did not experience the choosing as a choosing. I experienced it as a series of small, reasonable decisions, each of which was defensible, and none of which was the decision to go down and stay down. And that is the truest thing I can tell you about how a man ends up somewhere. He would have sworn he would never go. He does not go there. He takes 40 small steps, each of which is only to the next reasonable place. And the 40 small steps are a road, and the road has a destination, and the destination was written in a drawer under the desk the whole time. The first small, reasonable decision was that 3 days was a long time. That is all. I hung up the handset after Doris's voice went back into the static, and I thought, 3 days is a long time, and the count is made every night, which meant 3 more lines at least, 3 more nights of the tarp and the missing second, and I found that I did not want to endure 3 more nights of the count being made to me, against my will, in the passive terror of the fugue, when I could instead make the count myself, cleanly, on purpose, with a small clean click, and be at peace. That was the first step. It was a decision only about how to get through 3 days. It was not a decision to go down, but it was made in the site's language, in the grammar of the count. And once a man is thinking in the grammar of the thing that means to keep him, the keeping is mostly done. The second small, reasonable decision was that I should understand the thing before the plow came so that I could report it accurately. You see the shape of it. The plow was coming, help was coming. The warm world was reaching up through the snow, and my response to the reaching was to reason that I owed the reachers a full and precise account, that a man of my discipline could not be plowed out having left the central fact of the site unrecorded, that it would be a dereliction, that the log would be incomplete, and an incomplete log was the one thing I could not abide. And so, in the name of completing the record for the people trying to save me, I resolved to go down through the hand's width of dark and see, and write it all down and be, at last, the caretaker who did not merely report that it was still just the camera and then fall silent, but who went to the source and documented it, and broke the pattern by being thorough where every man before me had gone vague. I dressed the descent up as its opposite. I told myself I was going down to defy the site by recording it, when in truth, recording it was the site's whole purpose for me. The recording was the keeping, and I walked down to be kept while believing I walked down to bear witness against my captor, and the two are the same act. That is the thing I understand now, that I did not understand then. To witness a thing and to be kept by it are the same act when the witnessing is all you are. I went down on the first of the 3 nights. I took the log with me. I want that noted because it is the detail that tells the whole story to anyone who has understood me. I did not take a weapon. I did not take a light beyond the small one clipped to my jacket. I did not take the radio, though I could have unbolted it. I took the log, the bound company book with a long count in it, and my own single deliberate line at the bottom of the count. I took the record down into the warm, because a man does not go to the place he will be kept without bringing the thing he keeps with, because the log and I were not separable anymore. We were the one true thing between us. And if I was going down, then it was going down. And I carried it under my arm the way you carry a thing you love down a stair you are afraid of. The chain was off the wheel. I did not take it off. It was off. It lay coiled on the concrete of the landing like a thing that had been set down carefully by someone who wanted it out of the way, but tidy. And the padlock lay beside it, open. Its shackles swung wide, and the wheel of the hatch turned under my hand with no resistance at all, greased smooth, silent, and the door swung inward its full sweep onto the dark, and the warm came out over me, over all of me now, not a thread and not a breath, but a tide of it, warm and breathing and smelling of nothing, and I stepped through, and the light clipped to my jacket showed me a stair going down into sub-level 2, ordinary concrete stairs, wet with the warm the way a cold glass is wet in a warm room. Condensation, the warm below meeting the cold above and weeping at the seam, and I went down. I will not describe sub-level 2 beyond what is true, because the temptation to make it a chamber of horrors is strong, and it was not a chamber of horrors. It was worse than that. It was ordinary. It was a low concrete room the size of the main hall above, and it was full of the relay and pumping machinery that the site had been built around, the actual heart of the place, great dead housings and dry conduits and banks of gauges gone to zero. And it was warm, and it was breathing, and I could not find the source of either. There was no furnace, there was no wind. The machinery was dead and cold to the touch where I touched it, and yet the room was warm and the room breathed, a slow rise and fall in the air itself. And I understood that the warm and the breath were not produced by anything in the room. They were the room. The site itself was warm and breathing the way I was warm and breathing. And I had walked down into the inside of a living thing that had been sitting under the snow for longer than the company that built it had existed, that had been here before the relay was built over it, that had allowed the relay to be built over it, that had allowed the company and its 3 mergers, and its screening filter and its hiring of men like me, all of it, the whole apparatus, arranged patiently across decades to bring a certain kind of man down these stairs at 18-day intervals in the deep of winter, with the road sealed and a log under his arm. In the center of the room, on a workbench that was the only clean surface in all that dead machinery, there was a book. It was a log, company issue, the prior edition, older than the man before me's, and beside it another, older still, and beside that another, a stack of them, a stack of logs going back and back. And I went to the bench and I opened the top one, and it was the log of the man before me, and it ended the way his ended, a full final page of scored lines, and at the bottom, in a failing hand, 4 words. And they were not the same 4 words. They were that man's own 4 words, his own true thing written at his own end. And I opened the next one down, and it was older, and it ended the same way, with different words. And I understood that the stack was the count, that the lines in my log and the man before me's log were only the surface of it, that beneath the count of nights was a count of caretakers, a tally of men who had come up talkers and gone down quiet and had walked down these stairs with their logs under their arms and had added their book to the stack, and that the stack was long, was longer than the relay station, was longer than I could reckon by the light clipped to my jacket, receding into the warm dark of that low room, book on book on book, a library of endings, a record kept by the thing that could not let a caretaker go unrecorded any more than I could let a minute go unrecorded. And I stood at the bench with my own log under my arm, and I understood that the site and I had the same sickness, that I had come 41 miles past the last named town and down 2 levels into the earth to meet the only thing in creation that was made exactly as I was made, that could not bear the uncounted, that kept everything, that rounded nothing, and that had been lonely in its way, the way I was lonely, and had been waiting across all those books for a caretaker who would understand it, who would not merely be counted but who would count, who would look at the stack and see not horror but kinship. And I was that caretaker. I was the one it had been counting toward all along. And the correction in the static came back to me. What are you counting for? And I had the answer now, standing at the bench. The answer was that the counting was for this, for the not being alone in it, for the finding at last of another keeper. And I want to tell you that I turned and went back up the stairs. The plow was 2 days off. I could have gone up. Doris's hand was still reaching. I stood at the bench with the stack of the kept before me, and the way back up still open behind me and the warm breathing all around. And I had, I believe, one last real choice. The last one the site would let me feel as a choice. And here is what I did with it. And I set it down plainly because it is the whole of me and the whole of the account, and I have sworn off rounding. I took the pen from my jacket. I opened my own log on the bench beside the older books. I turned to the page with the long count, the count that was the site's hand and my hand grown into one hand, and below the count, below my earlier single deliberate line, I began to make lines. Not one, many. I filled the rest of that page with them, stacked and scored, pressing hard, the pen biting the paper. And I made them freely, and I made them fast, and I made them because they were true. Because every line was a night that had occurred, and a minute that had been counted, and a thing that would not be rounded off. And I understood as I made them that I was writing the last third of my own log, the way the man before me had written his. That I was completing the pattern not because the site was forcing my hand, but because my hand and the site's hand wanted the same thing and had, down here, finally become the same hand with nothing left to distinguish them. And when the page was full, I did not stop. I turned to the last page, and at the top of it, I wrote the time in 24-hour format, unrounded, the true minute. And then I filled the rest of that page too, top to bottom, edge to edge, with the count, until the pen went through the paper in places the way it had gone through the man before me's. And at the very bottom, in what was left of my crossed and careful hand, I wrote my 4 words, my own true thing, the thing that was true of me and had always been true of me, and was the reason I was there and the reason Miriam had left, and the reason the site had chosen me. And my 4 words were, I kept it all. Not it counts them all. That was the man before me. His true thing was about the site, about the thing that counted. He died grateful to the counter. My true thing was different. My true thing was about me, because I was never able, even at the end, even completed, to make it about anything but me and my keeping. And my 4 words were, I kept it all. And I looked at them, and they were true. I had kept it all. Miriam and the streetlight and every minute of 90 days and every line of the count. I had kept all of it and been kept by all of it. And the small, clean click came, the loop closing, the last loop, the one that closes a life. And it was the sweetest thing. It was sweeter than Miriam. It was sweeter than anything the warm world had ever offered me, because the warm world had only ever asked to be seen, and I had never known how. And this asked only to be kept, and keeping was the one thing I knew. I set my log on the top of the stack. I want that to be the image, because it is the true last thing I did as myself. I placed my book on top of the older books, added it to the count of the kept, and the warm breathed, and the light on my jacket showed the stack a little taller than before, and somewhere far above, faint through 2 levels of concrete and dead machinery, the radio in the empty office crackled, and I heard, or I have told myself since that I heard, Doris's voice come up into the empty room where I was not, saying my name, saying station, confirm, saying it again, station, confirm your check, and a 3rd time. And then a silence. And then, in the voice with the tiredness gone out of it, and something older come in. The voice of a woman writing in her own log 41 miles away. She said only, oh, just that. Oh, the sound a person makes when a thing they have been dreading and half expecting and quietly counting toward themselves arrives on schedule. And I understood, standing among the kept in the warm, that Doris was a keeper too, that her caretaker's log was its own stack, that she had written O for the man before me and the man before him, and back along the stack as far as it went, that she was the count above the snow as the site was the count below it, that the whole world was records inside records, hands writing in the margins of other hands, all the way up and all the way down, The site keeping the caretakers, Doris keeping the site, and something keeping Doris, and something keeping that, and that Halloran-Two was only the place where the walls between the counts had worn thin enough that a man could see the whole apparatus, could see that being a witness and being a thing witnessed were the same, that the keeper and the kept were the same, that I had spent my whole life on the wrong side of a distinction that did not exist, terrified of the uncounted, when all along I was myself being counted, was myself a line in a tally I could not see the bottom of, and that there was, in this, a peace I had never been offered by anything that loved me, because the things that loved me had wanted me to stop counting and be seen, and I could not. And here at last was a thing that did not want me to stop, that wanted only to add me to the count and be added to by me. And I stopped fighting it, if I was still fighting it, which I do not think I was. And I let the worm have me the way I had let the tarp have me on all those nights, gently, a hand over the mouth of the mind. And I went under, and I did not wake in the corner this time. I did not wake at all in the way I had been awake. I became instead a thing that is warm and breathes and has no smell, a thing that keeps. They cleared the road. I know this the way I know the sound of Doris's "oh," which is to say, I do not know it. I have assembled it from the worm, from the count, from the record the site keeps, and lets me read now that I am part of the record. The plow came a day late, 2 days late. The weather did not hold. They found the office empty and the radio on low, breathing its static, and the log gone from the desk, and the cot in the far corner, and the coffee gone to a black skin in the pot. And they found the drawer open and the man before me's log in it, and read the 4 words at the bottom. It counts them all, and they did what the company does, which is to seal the site and file the caretaker under left, in the flat way that word gets used to cover the place where a better word should be. And they did not go down to sublevel 2, because sublevel 2 is sealed per order, and the chain is through the wheel, and the padlock is on the chain, and the sign is curled at the corners, and the door swings inward a hand's width onto the warm dark. And it will stay that way, patient, until the season comes around again and the road closes, and the screening filter finds another man who cannot let a thing go unrecorded and sends him up 41 miles past the last named town with a log he does not yet know he will carry down the stairs. And I am here in the warm with the stack, and I keep the count of the days and the count of the caretakers and the count of the seconds, including the ones that do not exist. And I keep Miriam, whom I could not keep in the world. I keep her here perfectly, every minute of her, unrounded. And it is not her. I know it is not her. It is the record of her. It was always only the record of her. And here in the warm, I have finally stopped being able to tell the difference. And that is the mercy of the place. That is what it offered me, that the world could not. It took away the terrible knowledge that the record is not the thing. And when the next man comes down these stairs with his log under his arm, as he will, as the count requires, I will be one of the books in the stack that he opens, and he will read my 4 words. I kept it all, and he will feel if he is the right kind of man. And the site does not choose the wrong kind, not horror, but recognition, the click, the loop, the sweetness, and he will place his own book on top of mine, and the stack will be a little taller, and the warm will breathe, and 41 miles away, a woman, or the thing that keeps the woman, will write "oh" in a log of her own, and none of it will be rounded, and none of it will be lost, and none of it, not 1 minute, not 1 second, not the 4 minutes that belong to someone, will ever again be allowed to have not occurred. The cold was never the thing to watch. I want that to be the last thing I set down, for whoever finds this, whoever is keeping the count of accounts like this one, the cold was never the thing. The cold only kills you. The warm keeps you. I am kept. I have crossed my last 7. The static is patient, and so am I.